All right, Rich Elmoyan is joining us tonight at Nova Lab Studios. Rich, thanks for coming, man.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for your time.
Yeah, we whipped this up literally today, so glad we were able to make it work. So I know you went to school in San Francisco State. You studied international relations and geography.
Yes, sir.
I don't know anyone else that's done that. Especially not most people I know are Armenian, so especially no one Armenian, at least around here in my circle that I'm aware of that's done that. So it's an interesting choice.
That funny answer is I wasn't supposed to. I kind of stumbled upon it. I started with interior design over there. And
it's
then
a big switch.
Yeah, big switch. And I was like, but I've always been into geography, and I was like, maybe let's try geography after I sat into one of the classes where it was like much more than, do you know the states? And I'm like, whoa, it's more than that.
Yeah.
Let's check it out. And I ended up majoring in it, and then that led to international relations. And I played for the Armenian national basketball team, so that was an interesting route to use diplomacy in the realm of sports. So that was the goal. Let's see if that still happens.
So when you started studying, like once you decided, okay, I'll go this route, did you have a plan? Like, what am I going to do ultimately?
No, I literally just jumped into it. I had no idea. I was working like 2-3 different jobs, in college, and especially in San Francisco. It's a tech capital. So rent is $1,800 for 200 square feet.
Yeah.
So, but at the time I really didn't, I just jumped into it. I started researching as much as I can. I picked up an internship that was helpful. It was in GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems. So basically Google Maps, but on a real estate base. And that's kind of my, that's how I started in the field. And then I had to move back to LA.
Yeah. So now I know you kind of blew up in prominence, especially in this area very recently. It was due to some videos that you've started to make, which I think are definitely informative, but your spin on it is very interesting, which I'm sure you get regularly, because you're talking about geopolitics, which I think you even said it in the interview with Christine. You're like, you're trying to make it sexy again. Yeah. Well, just make it sexy. I don't think it ever was sexy.
It's never been, never will. I even think it never will be. But.
Yeah, but yeah, okay, because like someone says geopolitics, like you're probably gonna get a few people that start walking out the door.
Literally.
But you make it funny, so I think, and it's funny, and at the same time, like, wait, actually. Is that actually what's going on? Like you're watching your whole breakdown of this country saying to this and doing this, and this whole circle of what's going on, and you're like, wait, is that actually what we're not seeing, what we're not aware of? So how'd that even come to be? What made you think like let me give this a shot?
I mean, it really started maybe. I think physically you have to be in a situation that kind of changes your perspective as a kid, or like whatever it is, right? That kind of like as a kid sees Vince Carter dunk, boom, he becomes a Raptors fan. And then he doesn't even remember why he's a Raptors fan when he grows up. So something like that. Mine was when we were a part of the protests in Armenia, because I lived in Armenia from 2006 to 2009. And that really exposed me to Armenian politics, because everyone is involved into politics over there. Doesn't matter how old you are. I remember I was like 12 years old, and kids would ask me, are you a Serjakan? Which basically means, did you vote for Serj? And there was a certain stigma that would go against it, because it was like the 1% of Armenia getting elected and elected over and over, where the people were starting to kind of rise against it when what happened in 2018. But I was there when that was just roots of it, when I specifically saw an opera. If you've been to Yerevan, opera is like the place to hang out, right? So that's where we were protesting the unfair elections. And then I lived only 2 blocks away, and then all of a sudden gunshots in the morning and stuff like that. And it's like a life-changing moment, because people were sleeping and protesting. They were doing an overnight protest and to change the regime. And then the next morning comes around, no one's there anymore. And a bunch of cops had to close the streets off. So when you have a situation like that, I think that kind of forces you to, but I didn't act on it until I was in college, away from home, on new place. I was like, let me just try something that really makes sense to me. So when you mix geography and international relations, geopolitics comes out of it. It's like the baby, right? So that's where the interest came in. I'm like, I love to see maps. I love to see, I love to analyze why and how certain things come out. And if you want to find out like how conflicts start, how's the way to, what is the path to a resolution, right? And one of the most important ones is the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, because it's kind of like a volcano. It erupted in the 90s, but then it became dormant in the international community. No one really knows about it. We know about Syria, but we don't know about what's happening in Armenia. And it's a dormant one for like 30 years now almost. And now it erupted. So that's kind of how I wanted to express myself, because I was doing comedy before. but like starting February, but I had to change over. I was like, I need to teach people what's happening, because all I see is emotional conversations. Azerbaijani bots versus Armenians. I just want us to see it from a different perspective. I think that's kind of where it got me to this, in terms of like right now.
What's the response you've been getting on those videos?
Depending which ethnic background you are. If you're Azeri, you probably send me death threats. If you're Armenian, like usually I get very positive ones. People always give me feedback. Like in the beginning, I was kind of like trying very hard to please the people through the comedy. Because at the end of the day, I'm also a creative. I'm very, very particular about what I release. But now is not the time, and you kind of have to go every night. And the feedback has been great. Like people have been very responsive. They've been understanding the issues. And I'm very like happy to say like 120 people like per night join my lives, where they learn a little bit more about certain topics that we've talked about, but also, at the same time, the new people can just jump in and it still makes sense because I give like a brief background of it the first 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a good amount of people every night hopping in. It's 120 is no joke. I mean, especially when you're again talking about something like this, it's a good amount to have, and to at least get that message across to that many people. Are you noticing that your videos I'm sure it's a lot of mostly Armenian people seeing it, but have you heard anything from other ethnicities outside of like hate from Azeris or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when one of my videos, it got caught by Serj Tankian, and he decided to repost it. And that's where I got to see how other people react, because Serj Tankian has a much more diverse fan base. For me, it's majority Armenians. So my job is to create content where it sends to people that may not be understanding of the conflict. Maybe you hear about it, yes, but then the terms don't make sense sometimes, because if you forward news sources all the time to your friends, it bombards them with writing. And the last thing you want the person to feel is like they need to read a report, to understand what's happening. So if I make it from an attractive perspective where the reference of how you start your research, because I don't want you to take what I tell you to your own beliefs. I want you to take my information, Google more into it, and understand that. And I think it's been helpful for foreigners, and my coworkers now understand it whenever I explain it. And I've learned to become more concise with the information I give too, because sometimes we can talk about our history for 2 hours. I need to be able to tell it to a person in 35 seconds. And that's kind of how TikToks are. It's you tell them what's up in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, it's very impressive how you're able to condense it, especially with those videos where you're limited in your time for like one, and you're trying to get whatever message across. Because I watch it, and then what's funny is like I watch it, and then it finishes. I'm like, I feel like there was a lot of information there, but it wasn't particularly long. So how long is it difficult for you putting it all together?
Like in terms of like the facts all together, or like the creative process?
Yeah, I mean, because again, the facts, I'm sure it can be overwhelming. So then you have to at that point be like, okay, I have to get all of these and then make it fit into whatever the time frame is. Is it difficult for you, like kind of bringing it all together, like deciding what do I omit, what's critical, how do I make this work in this amount of time?
It depends on, it's kind of like journalism, or I guess like any kind of content writing. You have your headliners, and then you have your subtitles, and from there you go. I mean, there's different angles of how you can talk about Armenian geopolitics. And understand that this was my focus in university. My thesis was on how the Armenian diaspora affects, as a transnational organization that is stateless, how it affects Armenian politics right now. I mean, the fact that we've raised 150 million, or probably more at this point, is insane. And other countries are going to want to know about it. So there's a lot of research on it. But yeah, I mean, there's different angles on how you can take it. Like right now, I'm focusing on how post-colonialism is a big part of why this is coming out, as well as nationalism, because both Azerbaijan and Armenia since 2000s have been increasing their nationalistic behavior. First time was when, unfortunately we saw when Azerbaijani diplomat axed an Armenian diplomat's head off, which is freaking weird. Of a taunt, if you want to call it that. But that was the turning point. And having that guy extradited and given a national hero in 2012 from Azerbaijan, that was the turning point when society was like, okay, so now, you can look at it from post-colonialism and nationalism. There's different angles, you know. It can be geographic, it can be economic, because we've seen the war always happens when Azerbaijan has a situation where like they have to figure out their money, like oil in 2015 dropped, 2016 boom, war. COVID, economy, 2020 boom, war. Like it's a very easy, and you know, social economies back in 88 to 94 boom, war. Like it's a trend that you can catch. You just got to pick which one you want to tell people. Gosh, I rambled on that one.
No, that's actually interesting. What you ended on was interesting because like something that I've been thinking of, I think like what we've talked about among friends is like the timing of these attacks doesn't seem coincidental given that in regards to like where the US is seemingly handicapped in what they do, because that's not really in their forefront. Frankly, I don't think it's ever been what's been going on over there. But especially now, you have elections. When it happened was a month ago, so elections were a month and change out. Now elections are less than a week out. So it doesn't surprise me. So I was thinking it was maybe the timing was more about that, but kind of what you just broke down, I could see that. I mean, maybe that's also part of it in addition to what you said.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the times, like in the field of international relations, we ask, what are the main factors that cause this? We don't say what caused this. What are the main factors? Because a lot of it can be changed. In 20 years from now, we might have information that completely debunks that theory. But for now, the job is to understand what's happening with the current, you know, factors that we can prove. And one of the main factors I personally find that were, you know, the reason why Azerbaijan capitalized now is that domestic affairs right now in Azerbaijan were shaky. Every time the Azeri government needs some kind of solidifying, reunifying, you know, message, because let's say the people are becoming angry that it's the same government for the past 17 years and we still haven't figured out the Nagorno-Karabakh war, when you've made it the forefront of our foreign policy through nationalism and propaganda, at some point when they're all at home in COVID time, they can be out in the streets and protesting. Right. So these people were, you know, not happy with the Nagorno-Karabakh issue back in March, back in June. And in July, they sacked their foreign minister because Aliyev was like, you know what, I'm going to show to the people that I'm dedicated to this. But, you know, it distracts them. He takes out the foreign minister who was trying for the longest time. I you know, from my speculation, the dude was probably not on board with the war because probably, I don't know, resources, whatever it may be. But Aliyev puts a new guy with no diplomatic experience in his position and says, you know what, we're going all in. And it's clearly Turkey's behind this whole thing at this point. Because Azerbaijan, when you look at what Aliyev is saying, it sometimes doesn't match with what's happening in the front lines. Not from the perspective of, let's say, he's hiding something. I think sometimes this guy just doesn't know. Seriously, he's in Baku. He's in Baku, and there's a lot of Turkish advisors on the other end, like on the front line. A lot of Turkish advisors and a lot of Syrian mercenaries. So at this point, is Azerbaijan really in control? So some of those factors we look at, Turkey's economy is complete plummeted at this point. The lira is at its worst.
Right.
So we also got to look at, you know, maybe Turkey has something into this where they can, you know, shift the mentality of what's happening domestically by going abroad and starting these things, because they're already in Libya and Syria. Now they're trying it in Armenia, given that this is the perfect time for them to go all in, because Russia's also spread thin. The US is spread thin. France spread thin. So it's like all the guys that have an opinion on what to do based off the OSCE Minsk group. If you don't know what that is, Google it. But it's basically the governing body international recognized that they can have a peaceful resolution. You know, they're the ones that come up with the peaceful resolution for Azerbaijan and Armenia, with everyone on board, meaning Azerbaijan and Armenia as well. So, yeah.
So do you think, so you're thinking that part of the reason they're doing it is they're kind of losing faith in their people. So it's like, let's try and bring them all together by attacking other nations, and like, let's all rejoice like that, possibly?
It's the stereotypical authoritarian thing to do when things are not going well and you're getting caught. I mean, because 90% of the GDP is oil. And they're run like a kleptocratic government, which kleptocratic means it's wealth distributed within the political leadership, right? And they're using their natural resources in international context to have, you know, pressure away. Like they can do whatever they want. Freedom of speech, zero. Freedom of press is a complete zero. Journalists are getting locked up left and right. So I think like there's much more to Azerbaijan, when we look at it, because of their circumstances. Yeah, I mean, they're literally the people are trying to force the government going to war. Like it's very rare for us to see.
Yeah, I mean, because I see them like saying pretty much like F you to everyone.
Yeah.
Like whatever nation that's stepping in, they're saying, well, screw you, we don't care. We don't need to do anything with you guys. Or the French PM needs to get his mental health checked or whatever.
Yeah, that was Erdogan, yeah.
Yeah, it's like they're both of them, they're just like saying stuff. It's like there's more countries though than you too. Like it's like you would think at some point they would stop saying like flipping the bird to everyone. But kind of how you broke it down.
I mean, Turkey Turkey definitely is using leverage that the Western world has given them, because Turkey has been a part of NATO since 1952.
Right.
So they've been getting infrastructure built by the Western world in Turkey, right? They of course didn't pop off until the early 2000s, but that's, it's a very similar trajectory of what if Russia was a part of NATO. Because Russia and Turkey kind of came up together as world powers in the early 2000s. Putin on his end, Erdogan on his end. Erdogan, of course, working once at a prime minister position, and then now he's a president, and gave more power to the president position. And I think I don't know how long he can stay as president now, but he just like passed like unconstitutional law.
I was gonna say, didn't he just make some kind of amendment or whatever it was supposedly whatever they called it?
I can't confirm how what the time frame of that is, but I know he's over there. It's kind of like a 51 to 49 similar Trump situation, right? Like half the people really like him. Half the people are like, I'm so sorry, like more of that perspective for what at least is coming out of Turkey.
Yeah. I don't know, man. Like it's obvious. Something that I keep talking about is like, there's like information overload. Mm-hmm. So what I found interesting when I was looking through your videos is your entire like caption is just sources, which I think is very helpful, because I like what you said earlier, where it's like, it's not just like I'm saying this, so I'm telling you this is what it is. Like it's not necessarily just take that information and run with it. It's more like, here's what I think, here's where I found it, figure it out. Like now make a decision on your own, because I think that's completely lost on a lot of people, not just about this. Not just about this right now, but just in general, like whatever, pick your political topic or climate change, pick anything. Yeah. It's always like that. It's just, what are the first 5 words in bold? That's what happened. Yeah. And we don't care about the rest of it. So the fact that you distill all of it in a one comical way to very effectively in a short amount of time. And then you also are like, by the way, here's where I found it. Yeah. I haven't seen that anywhere else. So I think that's a good blend. And
thank you, man.
I think I could see that. I don't know if what you've thought after all of this, because this is obviously what a lot of what your focus is on now. But once this is resolved, if you were to do similar things about just anything else, not just politics, just whatever, I'm sure it would be just as effective.
Thanks by the way. I've thought about like what's next, right? Because obviously, right now my focus is all in on Armenia. And it's insane, because it's kind of like I have the information, which of course would be not common knowledge I don't want to say it that way, but in the field of international relations, some people understand this concept a little more. But given that this is a very niche area, it's very niche. Caucasus studies still hasn't really taken off. I think after this war, it's going to become much more prominent in research. But like for example, in the 1990s, like there's not much scholarship on that conflict alone. So I want to contribute more to that. Like I want people to understand what's happening in our Armenian politics, but at the same time, I want to cover not only just that region. I want to cover more. So I think I'm going to start with explaining what the Caucasus is about, because it's not just Armenia and Azerbaijan. You also got Georgians. And just in Georgia alone, you have a bunch of ethnic minorities. Azerbaijan, you have a bunch of ethnic minorities. Kurdistan isn't like basically trying to get its own country into the mix. And if it, that ever happens, that affects us as well. We get an ally in the area. So stuff like that, I just want to take it off and take off and take it somewhere where it could become like a teaching lesson, because COVID also taught me a lot of people are not learning from their classes. Some people are telling me, I've learned so much in this matter of time just by watching a TikTok. They're like, please do more. Do this region. Do that region. Right. And it's helped me so far. But I think the next one is to have my own show, which we're in the process of right now. I have a couple of people from, and they're all Armenians, which is what I'm trying to keep it as, because ultimately this also taught me business. You know, like Armenians have to support each other, because if we're pumping all this money into Armenia Fund, we're going to have to help each other afterwards as well. So we're making the connections and, you know, learning from each other. Like, for example, I want to check this podcast out because I think this is very, you know, important for people to create, to express themselves. So that's also one thing that, you know, I'm going to do after this more, is get more involved with the Armenian professional community. But show is going to be the first start. Let's see how the first episode goes. We're working on it right now.
That's a fantastic point, and best of luck on that. I'm sure it will go well.
Thanks,
especially, again, given how you've prepared everything else, I don't doubt a show would be any different. If not, it'll be better with more amount of time and no time confinement, essentially. So I'm kind of curious if you've made recommendations like this before. You give your sources out, but in general, I think like with politics, let's keep it with politics. With politics, people are kind of, you're either all in or you could not care less, right? Yeah. And then you have some people that are kind of in the middle. I guess I'm kind of in the middle too. Like I think I know above average, but by no means do I know a bunch.
Yes.
What's the best way that you think? Like, well, I'll make it a two-parter. Yeah. How much do you think people need to know? Like, what's because I don't think people should be completely in the dark, but at the same time, the more you like read on certain stuff, it's like, oh my gosh, things are so convoluted. Yeah. But also, so what's a good balance, you think, like for everyone in general, not just like people in your profession, and then also like what's a good way to get started on it?
One thing that I would, you know, I guess the balance of it is that sometimes it's very hard to balance. I'm still learning how to balance it, right? How much information I should be taking in, how much information should be left out. Because yes, you sometimes get addicted to this stuff, because I could tell you follow these accounts on Twitter and then turn on your notifications. You'll feel like you're in war. Like straight up. Straight up. I have like a couple of accounts that I watch, and it's all videos, and it's all like almost real time. It sends me notifications immediately of what's happening. So every 5 minutes I'm getting updates in Armenia, which is essentially you're on the sideline watching it too. And it's insane. So what I'd advise is to simply subscribe to like a magazine. Like the one that I use is Foreign Policy. Of course, you have to take it with a grain of salt, because sometimes people don't realize that news, articles that are posted on, digitally, they are op-eds, and op-eds are opinion editorials. Essentially, a PR firm can send an op-ed that they've written, and if the relationship is tight with the magazine company, boom, it gets sent. So that's how Azerbaijan worked with their PR agencies to come out with articles like, for example, Luke Coffey, not like coffee to drink, but Coffey. He goes all in on Azerbaijani propaganda to the Western world. And he's the number one guy that they send if they need an article written by the PR firms like Mercury, PR firms like BGR, DPL, which they don't have that contract anymore, thanks to Armenian protesters. But those are I don't want to call them parasites, but that's how they get into your mind, because then they'll use search engine optimization, which is the first thing that pops up on your Google page, right? Like it optimizes how you find information. So a lot of us won't realize, but when we're searching for info, there's on purpose Daily Saba coming up whenever you write what's happening in Armenia, because Turkish channels are trying to let the world know what's happening. And they're paying that ad space for you to see. And then you get mad. You're like frustrated. You're like, oh my God. But if you do a couple of like SEO tool changes, which I have it on my Instagram, it teaches people how to use news. That's a very helpful way. So I'd say first learn how to read sources, right? Because 75% is doing 20. What was it? 20. The rest of 25% is like actually just learning about it. So actually try it out. See how these news sources come to you, because a lot of us sometimes go like these news sources are so biased. Well, there's a reason it's getting sent to you. Right. But like sometimes I found an article by the OCCRP, which is a institution which is against organized crime and corruption. They have 20 pages filled with how Azerbaijani corruption is highlighted, but they don't use SEO. They're in Czech Republic. They're in Bulgaria. That information is not coming to us. It's in English. It's research. And actually, it's 10 times better written than half of these newspapers. But the news is what comes to us first instead of research. So going back to, how I'm posting these Instagram videos, I want to make it where many people start doing this, where it becomes an attractive form of how you can take knowledge, consume information that you can turn into knowledge, essentially. So Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how to end sentences. By the way, I feel like people right now can tell that he goes like, this guy just ends sentences like, yeah.
That's okay. That works. No, I think that's something that can be like transferred over to anything. Again, not just with what's going on now, but that same methodology of finding information that is as accurate as can be. There's always some flavor from the journalists themselves, typically, from at least what I've read, but as unbiased as can be, I guess maybe is the best way to put it.
Balancing with the bias you can get.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the best way.
Yeah, because I think that's what happens a lot of time, like with just the regular politics here. When you read about it, it's like, oh my goodness, like how skewed can one thing be? Like some of them, at least they're like overtly like, yes, we're in this direction. So it's like, okay, at least if I read it, I already know. Like they're already pretty thing about it. Like, okay, we're in this direction.
You can immediately tell.
Yeah. But then there's somewhere like you don't know, then you're reading it, and then if you're not as informed, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is what's going on. And the same thing could happen with this situation. Like if you're someone that you're not an Armenian, you're not an Azeri, you're not a Turk, you're just whatever, and you're reading about this and you're reading that maybe that coffee guys thing, you're like, holy crap, I can't believe it. Like, what's up with these Armenians? It's like, well, you can fault them only so much in the extent like they don't know at all. Like that might happen with us. Like if let's say we read something about, I don't know, like what's going on in Ethiopia, we find something that says, actually those guys had it coming. You know, they did this, where it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe those guys. Yeah. But it's like, well, no, actually what happened was nothing. They just started getting shot.
Yeah. Like, God, I mean, since you're on topic, like Ethiopia is going through some shit. Nigeria is going through like the worst level of police brutality with SARS. Like it's insane. It's not just Armenia that's going through this as well, which is frustrating at the same time because I'm not seeing anything covered on Ethiopia either.
I actually was so I was, I don't know if surprised is the right word, but I was finding it more difficult to find information not on what's going on in Ethiopia, and I don't mean like hashtags. I mean like actually searching on Google and YouTube. Nothing. Like there's absolutely nothing about it. Like within because this is ongoing, so there's nothing within like the last month. Nothing about it.
And it's insane because I actually, I got my old account got hacked by Azeris.
So that's what it was.
Yeah, that's why my fan base, like not fan base, sorry, my followers are like freaking. Gosh, I sound like an asshole saying fan base. My followers.
I'm sure they're your fans.
I mean, I'd hope my mom is my fan. God. But no, my followers are all Armenian now because my old account got hacked, and once this war started, I was like, God, like I need to get back out there. Like I had to start from zero, and I was like, but I don't care. Like obviously, I'm just taking.
It's just there's a wider audience you could have reached it to. Yeah.
But my old account, I had like Turks and Azeris as well, and like on the account because in San Francisco there are Turks over there, so you want to make sure that content like reaches everyone.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it when Ethiopia couldn't find anything. There, I haven't even seen much about SARS, and again. I don't know, maybe for them it's the timing too. I don't know as much about this. I'm probably going to most likely sound like an idiot talking about it. So I don't know how long that has been going on. But again, like when you're here and because you get news when you're not looking for it here, right? You find out Biden said this, Trump said this, there's a fire here, someone got shot here, and you're not looking for it. It just comes upon you. All of that, like you look for it and I can't find. I'm looking for it, I can't find it. So it's like imagine like a regular person that is just unaware of all of these because they have no connection to Armenia or Azerbaijan, Turkey, Nigeria, or Ethiopia, and they're just like la 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 living. And then it's like, did you know that was going on in 2020? Something like that. It's like
and at some point, like I think about this a lot too. Like, how would we know if we didn't have friends in that area? Meaning that we live in the United States. Of course, it's very diverse. I can't imagine like the average person from Illinois or like the average person from Pennsylvania, like outside of the Philadelphia Armenian community, which is minuscule, to even know what's happening in Armenia. And that's also like, it kind of reminds me, I'm like, sometimes when I was a kid growing up, like we'd have the genocide marches every year. And there was a point where I was like, Mom, like, what's the point of this? Like the march in itself, what's the point of it? And she was like, we have to raise awareness of this or else it will be forgotten. And you don't understand how awful it is for your history to be forgotten. And at the time, like you don't think of it. But when you look at Armenia, it was a stateless nation from 12th century all the way until the 20th century. So for 8 centuries, we're kind of in the dark of history. Now we have an opportunity to actually prove ourselves. We're going to make sure people know that we were the first annihilation of that century. And the fact that the word genocide even exists is because we exist, and now we're not even known for it. Yet, and this is in no way to knock on any other religion or, ethnicity to have gone through the same atrocities and massacres and genocides, but ours needs to be heard, because this is the whole reason why we're in a landlocked region where a lot of people are fighting with us saying, you've never been here before. We're like, well, we've been here. We just got pushed more into this area, and that's why there's a lot of us here now. It's like the Ethiopia thing, it's not coming up. And that's such a tragedy, because it's literally in some articles they're mentioning that it's genocide. It's Christian genocide. It's almost like I need to read up more on it to probably talk more about it. But it's insane, because if the average person, like I said, in Iowa or whatever, wouldn't even know. But if they're getting more information out, like I know what people in Utah are now much more active in the Armenian community. It's insane to say that. Like Salt Lake City has a Logan. Like what? That's kind of cool. So it's like this movement is going to be another one as to what we're going to remember September 27th. Like that day is going to be remembered, because that was a very unnecessary aggression that we received. Though it was coming up, it was very unnecessary at the time, because Azerbaijan didn't sign the COVID ceasefire. That's the number one red flag that, a lot of countries in the world said, you know what? I am not going to shoot during the pandemic. Doesn't matter what. Doesn't matter what beef I have with the country next to me. Some countries said, I'm signing the ceasefire. Armenia was one of those countries. Azerbaijan hit them right when it hurt.
When was that announced? Like right when COVID started?
I think I could be wrong. Someone please fact check me who's watching this. It's either in June or July.
Okay. So since then there's like no. So that's already, like you said, a red flag. Well, why haven't they?
It's obvious. They don't want to get caught for that. The same way in 2016 they didn't agree to having monitors on the side where it tells you if who started the ceasefire. Who broke the ceasefire. 2016 that was one of the options we had. Azerbaijan didn't agree to it. So best believe they're not going to sign a ceasefire that gives them another red flag. Is there
some kind of consequence? What's the consequence? Had they signed it and they broke it, do you know what it would have been?
I mean, the consequences are essentially, if it's not mentioned, then anyone can just break the ceasefire,
right.
Unless any external pressure comes in. But the external pressure that we're seeing right now is Russia kind of being more relaxed, given that the Armenian government was a more pro-Western, more open to diversifying its aspects of, communication. The old government was only Russia, and that's how it is. But there's also a point to that, given that it's a very hostile environment you're in, and Russia is your only security guarantor on the west side, because our military pact with Russia is that Russia guards our Turkish border, but they don't have to guard our Azeri borders. That's the tricky part. So that's why this conflict always comes about. Russia kind of chills, watches what they can do on the chessboard, but this is the first time that Turkey is much more adamant about their position in helping out Azerbaijan, given the circumstance, given that Turkey is trading with Azerbaijan even more now. Russia used to be the number one energy supplier for Turkey 4 years ago. Now it's Azerbaijan. So Turkey's going all in on this to question Russia and its commitment to Armenia, given that it has 2 bases in Armenia, one being an Air Force base. So, I mean, it's much more. It's much more than what it really is. And Russia's getting much more active. And the consequences are, if Russia really cares, and Russia's reaction to the broken ceasefire was killing 86, Turkish-backed Syrian militants that were going to show up in Azerbaijan through and then to Artsakh. So that was their retaliation. Like, okay, if you're going to break the ceasefire, Turkey, this is what I'm doing. So they're not even playing chess. Russia's not playing chess in Armenia. It's playing chess in Syria. And then we're seeing now Turkey more and more backing off, and Russia's kind of taking control over there. And that's why Turkey's going more all in on Armenia.
So when you were saying Russia was thinned out, what else? So what are some of the things in play?
So Russia's sphere of influence, which sphere of influence, we can see like how a country can, influence another country, meaning that the U.S. is a big global influence, right? Some countries aspire to be on the United States level. You have to be friends with the United States kind of thing. If you're a post-Soviet country, most likely you have to be cool with the Russians, unless you're on the Western side, which is Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. They're in the EU. They're saved. Their time was in the early 90s. They made sure it was that time when Russia was busy with the Chechen war. But now Russia spread thin because it has Kyrgyzstan that just had an overthrow, which is another post-Soviet country. Belarus had its elections this year. They've seen the biggest protest they've ever seen, at least millions of people on the streets. They're still doing it after a month and a half or 2 months at this point. But Lukashenko's not leaving. He's been the president since 90s. Like, he's not leaving, and Russia is a big supporter of that. But now Russia is taking different stances where it usually wouldn't necessarily do because it has its own COVID issues, right? Its own economy is tanking as well. And Putin needs to show his people that we're still strong. Russia had issues with Ukraine. Now Ukraine is aiding Azerbaijan. Russia used to have an alliance with Georgia. Georgia made sure after 2008 Georgian-Russian war that they're not helping. So a lot of things are at stake where Russia can't necessarily help out Armenia immediately unless it needs to go through the Caspian Sea, through Iran, and from Iran into Armenia. But then that's a sticky situation of its own. But Russia is spread thin in Libya, Syria, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, and now Armenia. You got 5 places, and you got COVID on top of that. Oh, and not to mention Ukraine is now questioning you too, because Ukraine is teaming up with Georgia, Turkey, and Azerbaijan.
Is Ukraine doing that more out of spite, like out of spite towards Russia?
Do you like Larry David?
I know of him. I don't know.
Larry David in Curb Your Enthusiasm comes out with a spite storm just because he doesn't like how the business is operated next to him. He goes like, I don't like this place. This coffee shop stinks. I'm gonna come out with my own coffee shop. And it looks same branding, same thing. It's called Larry's Coffee Shop. So that's basically what Ukraine and Russia, very similar. If you look at them, probably the same coffee beans, right? But when you really look at Ukraine, they're trying to become much more westernized, and they're teaming up with Turkey just to make sure Russia's sphere of influence decreases, and it gives Ukraine more of an opportunity to be, how should I say this? They don't have to think about Russia twice if they make a decision, because Ukraine was trying to get forced into the EAEU by Russia, which is the Eurasian Economic Union, the counter to EU essentially in Central Asia, which definitely not as successful. But Ukraine has been trying to break away from Russia since the early 2010s. And it officially kind of did, but still Russia's dominant in the Black Sea, which, we know Ukraine lost the Crimean War, and Crimea is now a part of Russia, and Russia has more of an influence in that area. So Ukraine is now basically a second big dog in Sopranos, if you will. Like in Sopranos is the mob boss, right? For Ukraine right now, that mob boss is now Turkey. It used to be Russia. Now it's going with Turkey. I mean, it even applied to be a part of the Turkic Council. It's not even Turkic.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because you said they want to get more westernized and then they go with Turkey. I'm like, that doesn't seem like that's the right direction.
Turkey has leverage. Like we said, NATO. They took in a bunch of refugees. They're, a lot of businesses are now made in Turkey. Like it's a lot of connections have been made with Turkey at this point where sanctioning them necessarily, like, I don't even know if Erdogan cares if he gets sanctioned. He's just going to be like, I'm a part of the same team. Well, come on. What the shit?
That's something you said before we started was you saw this coming from like, what it was like 09 or something when like, that's toward the end of when you were leaving Armenia?
Yeah, definitely.
So what caused it that you're like, this is brewing?
Okay. I think 2009 is when I just simply got into politics. So I got more into, I'm like, okay, this is going to happen. But once I learned that Baku, meaning the capital of Azerbaijan, right? The governance. When Baku signed a deal with the Turks and the Georgians in 2006 for a pipeline to be taken from Baku to Tbilisi, from Tbilisi to Ceyhan, which is in Turkey, and then from there it's going to go either throughout the Middle East or you can also take it to Europe. Europe got interested in it. So now Europe had an actual interest in Azeri and like essentially investments that they had in Azerbaijan with the pipeline being made. A lot of people don't know, but France has a stake in that pipeline. So for France, they just want to make sure it's calm, in that area. But also like, given that Azerbaijan from 2006 has been buying Israeli arms, which is nothing, it's another level of what Azerbaijan was used to. Azerbaijan was only receiving Russian and Czech and some Turkish. Now they're going all out with Israeli. 825 million from 2006 to 2019.
How'd that come to be?
Oil money. Oil money. Their GDP is 90% oil. So whenever things are slow, they're going to war because they've bought all this military, arms. They've spent $5 billion in 2012. They mentioned $5 billion is what they spent. And since, I believe since the Soviet collapse or since the ceasefire, they've spent $26 billion in military, while Armenia has spent $6 billion. So it also tells you how the difference is. But in contrast to what the Armenians have, when you put them side to side, right? I guess we can just put them side to side, right? Where Armenia and Azerbaijan stands, that I knew that this was coming, is that heavy nationalistic behavior, basically patting the back of the guy that got, axed the head. Also, 2005, Baku's mayor basically told the German, to the German audience that you guys did what we don't want Armenians as our neighbors. You guys did that with the Jews, right? Like he literally says that. I can't paraphrase it because I don't want to memorize it at this point. But in 2005, we had that. Ilham Aliyev comes in 2003. Baku pipeline, 2006. 2012, we get into a confrontation with them again. 2007, 2009, we had Madrid Principles. Sorry, I backtracked there. 2007, 2009, we had the Madrid Principles, which was suggestions on how we should resolve this issue. Armenia doesn't agree to it because they don't like that Nagorno-Karabakh as a group of people are not a part of the talks. Then you also have in 2008, General UN Assembly votes that the UN resolutions are adopted. 39 countries, majority being Islamic countries, voted for Azerbaijan, majority being countries that take oil from Azerbaijan, voted that, yes, this is true, Armenia should leave its troops in Nagorno-Karabakh, whatever. These are called UN resolutions from 1993 that got adopted in 2008. And then 7 countries didn't agree to it. US, France, Russia, Armenia being majority of them. So they were trying from a diplomatic perspective to solve it from a different way because Azerbaijan didn't control as much of the land that they wished they did in the 90s. But now in the 2000s, they've gotten much more money since Ilham Aliyev comes around with the kleptocratic government that I mentioned. At this point, they're a monster. So they've gathered all this weaponry and whatnot, but now they're fighting with Syrian mercenaries. So they have all this weaponry and like great technical shit, but who's going to use them? You're going to fight in the mountains where you're not trained. That's where Armenia comes in advantage with having more people because Azerbaijan can only start a war in the summer when it's warm. When it gets cold, they're fucked. And the reason why they're fucked is because the mountains are so high in elevation, snow, by the time they're trying to attack more, because if you're on the offensive and in a mountainous area and there's snow, you're not gaining much. So that's why now they're having Turkish special forces come in. That's why they're using the Israeli drones so they don't actually have people there. They want to annihilate the people in that region so they can come in and easily take over because, let's be real, they can't fight those mountains by humans. You have to, literally put your flag there to make sure you know that it's your land.
Right.
If not, Armenians are just going to stay there. So they're literally using the tactic of cluster ammunitions, which is basically internationally illegal, even though Armenia and Azerbaijan don't sign that contract on purpose. But Azerbaijan has been using it since day one in civilian areas, which is now the most tragic part of it. War is going to come and go. People are going to die in war, but civilians are one thing that doesn't need to happen, and that's their tactic right now. That's the thing that sucks.
So they didn't sign that cluster one because they both anticipated, we might use it against each other. Yeah. Except Armenia hasn't yet, but obviously Azerbaijan's done it a couple of times, I think, right?
I mean, cluster ammunitions, are you familiar with it? It's basically, imagine a bomb with a bunch of mini bombs that turn into mini bombs and it starts spreading. So accuracy is not your point. Accuracy is not the objective when you're throwing cluster ammunition.
Just get in the general area.
General area, you kill whatever's near, which was banned essentially. The Yugoslavian war was one of the areas where it was used. War crime. It's considered a war crime. International court can take you. And that's what Armenia is currently pointing the finger at. But the UN has a genocide denier as the president. Mr. Bozkir from Turkey is their president since July. Or June. Or is it June or July? At this point, it's a phase. So it's a fuzz. But you literally have a Turkish diplomat that denies the genocide as a UN president.
All of the UN is presided by this person.
He's the president of it, yeah.
How's that work out?
Rotating. Who gets their turn? That's why it's also that. I think I forgot to mention that. That's why the UN doesn't really care. If you saw what the UN posted today, it was hilarious. They literally posted, no, it's not hilarious, awful, sad that people are dying, but it's so one-sided that it's obvious. They go like, these are the names of the people that died today in Nagorno-Karabakh, all Azeri names.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's very obvious because, you don't get the average Armenian in there, like Armenian name in there, or like, it's very obvious.
I mean, I've been hearing for some time that the UN is like a BS thing.
Trash.
Yeah. So, but again, I'm one of those people that I don't know that much about it. I just heard that. I'm like, I wonder why.
Yeah.
But
I mean, these organizations, they're international organizations that, whoever pumps the money in gets to get a say in it. I mean, there's a reason why international organizations don't focus much on China. China puts a lot of money into international organizations. Make sure those, institutions are still around, because one thing that the US currently does is not care about international organizations. Hence the reason why, their activity in NATO is not as much. Their activity in UN is not as much. Trump literally just pulled out. He goes like, I'm not going all into this. These things don't work to me. And that's what you usually get with a realist. Well, I don't know what he is, to be honest, but when you have a more realist approach to your international foreign policy, yeah.
Well, we'll hop back to that stuff because I want to backtrack a little in terms of, so all that we just discussed, right? Yeah. Super convoluted, right?
Yeah.
So
we just went. Sorry, I just go on zigzags.
No, but that's exactly how it is, though, right? Because it's literally, you take the region, you have all these surrounding countries, and everything is just like this. Mm-hmm. This guy's with this guy, this guy's with this guy. It's just a shit show. Mm-hmm. So come back here now. We're in the States. Well, let's look at LA, right? You have the diaspora here that's posting everything.
Yeah.
How's Trump doing this? Or where's Russia? Where's this? Where's that? Just that explanation alone should be kind of like a brief idea of look how messy this is. Because I see that. So obviously, we all want this done and resolved. Yeah. But realistically, it's not just a matter of the U.S. just being like, "Hey, cut it out," or Russia being, "Hey, cut it out." Because obviously they've shown that they're rogue pretty much. Turkey and Azerbaijan, they're rogue. And then you wonder, well, how can Israel sell? Like, how can Israel do this? Or where's Georgia? Where are these people? And it's like
40% of their oil comes from Azerbaijan.
Yeah,
Israel.
It's a lot of these ties that people just in general are not aware of because you don't look into it. Like, you don't think about it. I didn't know either. I didn't know until this happened. And there's still a lot of it I don't know about. So you wonder, it's like, well, why isn't it ending? Why isn't it ending? It's like, look, we all want it to end, but then it's like, it's not just as simple as that.
I mean, it's difficult because we also have the diaspora guilt, man.
Yeah.
Like, it's a thing.
Yeah.
And that's something I've been mentioning to people, don't get sucked into the diaspora guilt. Take that energy, take it into research, take it into awareness, whatever it is. But that's sometimes we get so into our why? Well, when is it ending? Because let's be real, we all know someone at this point, right? So it's insane. And to look at it from an outside perspective, if you haven't been trained, at this point I've been trained, right? I got to speak to the ambassador to Cyprus. I got to speak in front of him, and the guy let me know what my perspective, it looks like from a more professional way. But if you're not trained to read these circumstances like that, and it's your first time realistically, right, for our generation, we haven't been in something like this. Our parents have at age 25, 26 technically. But this is something new. And that's the thing, we have to look at it from a perspective of this is going to go on whether we like it or not, simply because of what's at stake right now. Russia's not as into the conflict. They're neutral until it hits Armenian proper, because their obligation lawfully is to help us only when the Armenian land gets hit and if Armenia requests it in the first place. And you have to understand that winter comes around, Armenia is actually going to push out Azerbaijan a little more. And I say that confidently. If we don't see any external factors that happen, I don't know, God forbid, I don't even want to mention it.
Yeah.
But we have to look at it from a more logical perspective, just for our own sake of health too. Nervoeconomic, and to translate that, we're getting very frustrated.
Yeah, I was talking with someone today, and they're visiting California from somewhere else, and they were saying, I was like, "Oh, how are you doing?" And they were like not great. This is all. She's like, I wake up.
The circumstances.
Yeah, it's I wake up and I'm just reading about this. I'm trying to sign stuff. I'm trying to spread awareness to people. I'm trying to do this. And I told them the same thing. I'm like, look, you're not doing anything wrong. And what I'm about to say isn't to say stop doing what you're doing, but we have to factor that for us to be effective in what we're trying to do, we need to take care of ourselves.
Yes.
So if you're just panicking, you're just anxiety riddled, you're just inundated with negative news. Look, I'm not saying, act like everything's great. No,
definitely. But
also be mindful. For that to happen, to what that says on that hat, you have to be tip top Magoo up here. Mm-hmm. So if you're getting fried, you're one of those people saying I can't anymore, I can't, or I'm so whatever, I'm so flustered, I'm so thing. That's fine. Regather yourself and then go back to how you were handling. Well, not necessarily maybe how you were doing it, but do what you were doing, but optimize what you're doing.
It's a learning curve too.
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of us here haven't dealt with it, so it's understandable. Because I see some people just come out guns blazing, and it's like, great, the intention is good, and this is all opinion. There's no right or wrong.
Yeah.
But I feel like some stuff can be reeled back a little bit. Some things definitely can be organized better. I'm sure you've probably seen as well. Like, you know, certain people. I feel like it's interesting that we'll have a protest, but then there's like different groups that make up the protest, and everyone kind of has their own thing. Everyone has, we're gonna chant this, we're gonna chant that, or like when they went to Newport for Trump's thing, some people were doing one thing, some were doing another, and then they had to kind of gather people back in. We have to be as unified as possible. It's inevitable, man. There's a lot of us, so someone's gonna end up straying off and then doing something, and it's not maliciously, but gotta bring it back in.
I'm gonna bring in a perspective for you that got me thinking the other day. When we were talking about this with a friend of mine, I was like, have you noticed the subcategories of an Armenian? Like the amount of subcategories that can go into them that can shift how you think? And let me dive into it more. An Armenian American that has a Lebanese background, is quite different than an Armenian American with an Hayastansi background, a person from Armenia, like Yerevan, right?
Yeah. Which
that in itself is, our parents have a completely different memory, right? Lebanon is quite different than what the Soviet Union was. Soviet Union alone is quite different than what the Iran was. Let's say French Armenians, even completely different. So to get everyone on the same page, and then you come to the US where itself is kind of in a identity crisis, to get them all together in a time of COVID, that is almost impossible.
That's a great point.
That is almost impossible, right? Like, and then there's a language barrier a lot of times. The older generation kind of stems away from the younger generation based off of the resources they use, you know, Facebook versus Instagram, all these things. And it kind of puts you into subcategories where, how do you unite 8 million Armenians across the world, right? If we're going to stick with 8 million outside, 3 million inside, that is intense. And then you have to go into your subs, right? France, Russia, US. I've got to meet a lot of people from the East Coast just over from this situation, right? People from all over, like DC, Cleveland, Florida, like Armenians from Dallas. Like, it's insane to me. Like, it was the first time that Texas saw Armenian flags, like at a protest. It was insane. Fort Worth had one. Fort Wayne? No, Fort Wayne's in...
Wayne is
Michigan.
Oh, is it there? Oh, yeah. Fort Worth, I believe, is.
Fort Worth.
I think it's outside of Dallas.
And that's where, like, I got into a group of, like, a couple of different, you know, Defend Armenia, Defend Artsakh organizations, which each had, like, 500. So I was like, oh, my God, this is amazing. It's like a giant lecture hall with a bunch of Armenians, and, like, 3 Armenians are running it, and they have, like, project management background, like, product like... Yeah. I can't lead a crowd from a structural perspective. I can talk, I can host, I can give you information where to reach. You know, I'm like a host I'm like a concierge service essentially. And you're going to need people that structure it. So I think for what we have, to give them the amount of time, given that we haven't really thought of this as a generation, because they've been getting ready. They have the bot farms. They have the people ready, like typing at the right time. Like, we've known this.
You can tell. Looking at it,
you know this. And it actually got exposed by one of the accounts on the Armenian pages. And I was like, oh my God, that is genius. They go and they flood Cardi B's comments, and then they give her bad, you know, product reviews. That's insanely smart. Yeah. Like Kim K, same thing. Elton John, same thing. Like, it's insane. So now we're becoming our own version of that, but in a more positive way. Like, we find out research, right? Robert Tarosian found the research. I decided to, like, spread it out too. Robert did his thing. Now he has, like, a bunch of, like, thousands of followers where he's leading a crowd of people based off of the information that he got, that PR firms like this, that, and that are representing Azerbaijan. We need to protest against it because that's the US way. American way is protesting in the streets at the time of their workplace and making their clients know, because money's the way that, you know, the American world goes around. It's different in France. The only way you get people to listen is when you freaking protest and block roads. I remember one time I was trying to fly from France to Switzerland, and I couldn't because the train conductors in France decide that they're on strike, and therefore in solidarity, the you know, aviation stopped too, and that's another way of gathering attention.
Right.
I will probably never go back to Switzerland because I had a bad personal time there, but I will remember that the train conductors were definitely protesting. Same thing with like people in Glendale when they visit maybe on a Sunday, they see all these flags. They're like, "Is it genocide day?" And then people are like, "No, asshole, it's a fight."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh shit,"
Yeah, man, it's that's actually a very good point because I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, each background's gonna have their own way. Because I watch this stuff and I'm more of like an observer in all of this. Like I look at it and I'm wondering, I'm like, okay, like, and I props to everyone that is involved with it, that's organized it. Like, it's no joke. It's very easy for me to just sit there and be like, I know.
Yeah.
But like, again, I'm looking at more like, okay, like what can we do better? Like what can, not that it's not good.
Yeah. There's always room for improvement.
Yeah. Because obviously the message has not been, it's gotten to the president. Like the fact that, you see him, people are yelling and literally just yelling at him and he's like.
Because we know how he works.
Exactly. You pander to him, you get him. And what was it, 2 or 3 rallies, he brought it up. And I'm not saying that's enough. It's not. But then it's funny because then you see the political divide in the Armenians from that. You have the people saying, yeah, he said it, he mentioned us. And then you have the other ones where it's like, so? Well, just because, like, what has he done? He didn't say it, It's just it's so funny seeing, and then when I see that, I'm like, okay, let's try and let's not get divided. Now's not the time for the political divide. Let's find some solace in that.
You have to find a common ground.
Yeah.
A common, like, it's kind of, I've been telling my friends a lot, wartime is quite similar to sports. And a lot of sports are actually based off of war. Football was based off of war. There's a reason why they call it the trenches, offensive, defensive line, quarterback being the general, all these things.
Good point.
But when we look at how we approach a team, right, we have to understand how to use the personalities of our players to incorporate. Like, let's say Dwight Howard, if for all the people that understand basketball, Dwight Howard didn't play a single second when he played, I believe when he played the Rockets, because when Dwight Howard's not needed on the Rockets, but he's needed in other places.
Right.
So in times like this, we learn how people can adapt in certain areas and you use your strengths to your advantage. And I think that's where people get to exercise that now and get to really find themselves. This was kind of going with the subcategories I was mentioning. People like, Goliath the Great is a big name now. He's definitely the man behind like all the protests and stuff, but he understands how he can help, his voice, his platform, and he's going all out. And like, let's say the Trump fans, right? We got to understand at the end of the day, he is the president. Boom. That's it. I don't care if Barack Obama was good. I don't care if Ronald Reagan was good. All I care about right now is that this is the man behind, and he is part of the OSCE Minsk group. The same way I'm holding Macron, accountable, the same way I'm holding Putin accountable, and the same way I'm definitely holding the Aliyev family accountable, because those are the dudes that can make a decision. And when we have people wearing Trump t-shirts saying Armenia loves you, I don't care if I like Trump or not. I'm definitely saying Trump, Armenia loves you, because he's gonna be like, I love Armenia too. He feels good about it because that's how he operates. While Joe Biden is much more like, he'll see a situation, he'll be like, okay, Trump didn't do this. I'm gonna make sure I go all in on this Armenia issue for now, and then we'll see how it goes.
We still kind of didn't though.
I personally didn't like.
It was a pretty crap statement.
I didn't like his statement. It was simply using it against Trump, but at the same time, that's what they're gonna do right now. That's the whole reason why.
I think that's the only time they even addressed it, probably, because again, that's least of their concerns.
I think Biden had another statement yesterday or like today. He had one yesterday with the Kamala and the Biden-Harris administration, I guess if you can say it. They had just a statement on how the Nagorno-Karabakh ceasefire was broken, and kind of saying that the U.S. is not doing enough to make sure this is resolved. But then in one of the statements prior to that, they mentioned how Armenia needs to leave those 7 adjacent regions, which is the whole reason why Armenia is there, is because it guarantees the security of the Artsakh people, and it's a human rights issue. Armenia is calling it for human rights. Azerbaijan's calling it for territorial integrity, which in the whole first place, that shouldn't have happened, which if you were interested to hear about that, I mean, I don't know how we're doing on time, but like,
go for it.
Dude, have you heard on the law on secession? Sorry.
Have I say it again?
Have you heard of the law on secession?
No.
Like how Soviet republics, what gives them the right to become an independent state? Like, for example, the Republic of Abkhazia, it it declared itself independent, but it didn't really have independence until the 2008 Russian-Georgian War, when Russia annexed it and said, you know what, it's its own country now. Only a couple of countries recognize it, like Venezuela and Syria and Russia. But other than that, no other country really recognizes that a country. Artsakh declared its independence in 1991 before Azerbaijan did. And actually, it's based off of the law on secession from 1990, which gives you the right as an oblast, which is basically another way of saying a region. But if you have the title of an oblast, which is Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast, a part of Azerbaijani SSR, they had the right to leave Azerbaijan SSR as its own sovereign state without having to deal with Azerbaijan's supranational entity. So essentially, it gives them a right to vote away from Azerbaijan on a legal basis. But when Azerbaijan became a country, Armenia became a country, the rest of the world kind of forgot about Nagorno-Karabakh because what does it have to offer? It's a war zone at the time. It gets forgotten. And therefore, Azerbaijan's borders included Nagorno-Karabakh illegally, which it technically shouldn't have, because legally the Soviet borders were just so confusing to the rest of the world that they presented this argument. Azerbaijan said, this is our borders. Armenia said, this is our borders. And because Armenia didn't claim Artsakh to be its own, it didn't claim it as a part of Armenia. It said it's its own entity because they declared independence, and that's what we want. We want to recognize Artsakh as a country. It let it be. But the 1994 ceasefire basically paused the war and said, we're going to come to a peaceful resolution. And it ultimately just forgot about Republic of Artsakh as a country of its own. So that's the whole issue, that we have Artsakh as its own country. We have Armenia as its own country, Azerbaijan, but Artsakh is not being recognized as its own country because Azerbaijan doesn't admit that Nagorno-Karabakh exists as a nation state. So the law on secession is literally the golden ticket as to why the Republic of Artsakh should be recognized. It's very murky. It's very muddy. We've already agreed that this is the territorial boundaries of Azerbaijan, right? Like we see on a map. If you go on Google, you're gonna see that Nagorno-Karabakh is a part of Azerbaijan, but realistically, no. The legal papers will indicate no. But the UN right now is not necessarily in favor of Armenia, is it?
So the only way then that can be enforced is if the UN were to back it in a way?
Essentially. Same thing as what you had in Kosovo. Because the Kosovo issue is quite similar to what's happening for Artsakh, right? Except Kosovo is in the backyard of the EU. So it has a lot, also Kosovo kind of creates another member state that EU can I don't want to say exploit, but also have more influence in a country. Because Serbia is openly not with the European Union. They have more connections with Russia. They have a bigger Slavic connection with the Russians. And since the Yugoslavia war, they kind of broke into its own entity and got alienated, and kind of Serbophobia kind of started, where the Yugoslav war was all blamed on Serbia. But Kosovo was a part of Serbia until 2007 when they declared independence. But Kosovo technically in the Yugoslavian, as a country in Yugoslavia, had its own autonomy and had the right to declare independence as well. So it's quite similar to what we saw in Artsakh, except Artsakh is not in the backyard of Europe. It's in the backyard of Armenia and Azerbaijan and Iran and Russia and Georgia.
Ideal. That was sarcasm, in case it wasn't picked up.
Well, fucking great.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we're in the, how should I say this? We're kind of like the ungentrified area of Eastern Europe, I would say. Kind of, if you want to call it West Asian at this point, I think that's the term we're calling it. But Armenia is still kind of untapped. It's not really, foreign investment is not really there yet. Azerbaijan is just oil, but the average person lives in poverty. So that area still hasn't really seen any economic growth. And this issue is not going to surface really because Kosovo is right next to Slovenia, right next to Croatia. Now EU members, right? Slovenia and Croatia. So now they're trying to get Kosovo in. So that politics over there is quite different than what the politics are in Armenia and Azerbaijan when it's a local conflict. It's not really a regional, massive, big deal when it's in the middle of Europe.
So in your opinion, what's a realistic timeline that you think a resolution can be made with this? Or is that just way too difficult to even forecast?
I think the issue has been that there hasn't been a timeline. Armenia having the status quo in its favor, right? You control the majority of the region of Nagorno-Karabakh and the 7 adjacent provinces that technically was a part of Azerbaijan. But Armenia has a strong stance that we're committed to peaceful resolutions. But at the same time, Armenia is settling in those areas. Like they're investing in those areas to create infrastructure. So they're not really planning on leaving, but they're at the negotiations table saying, we are, peaceful, this and that. Well, yeah, but Azerbaijan is also frustrated because they want to come to a peaceful resolution and they're not getting the deals that they want because Armenia puts on the table what they wouldn't sacrifice, Azerbaijan wouldn't sacrifice, and same on the other end. They're not giving anything off the table. Armenia says Nagorno-Karabakh needs to be a part of the conversation. Azerbaijan says, no, that is a part of our country. Boom, stalemate. So I think the first thing they both need to mention is the root of the problem. Because the root of the problem was Sumgait and Baku. Vladimir Putin mentioned it in the Valdai Discussion Club, which is basically once a year Putin gets together and talks about what's happening in the country and he accepts any question posed to him by any journalist. The issue, the root of the issue that Putin agrees on is Sumgait and Baku pogroms, which were essentially anti-Armenian movements in the cities of Sumgait and Baku, Sumgait being outskirts of Baku. And the reason why that started was in 1988, Nagorno-Karabakh wanted to reunify with Armenia because we remember that Stalin in the 1920s gave Nagorno-Karabakh and Nakhchivan to Azerbaijan to control. And Nagorno-Karabakh being majority Armenian, 90%. So that's the root of the problem, Sumgait and Baku, because when Nagorno-Karabakh created its own council, secretively technically, and declared that they want to be a part of Armenia, they didn't say we want to be independent. They say we want to rejoin Armenia because Gorbachev was much looser of policies that he exposed. And that angered Azerbaijan. And information was taken very differently back then in the Soviet Union. Remember, KGB still around. Haydar Aliyev running the country technically was a KGB officer, which is Ilham Aliyev's dad. And, the country was just kind of getting torn apart and anti-Armenian pogroms were starting. And they were searching for Armenians, quite similar to what you're seeing in France and in France right now, where Turks are in the street asking for Armenians to come outside, right? It's exactly what was happening in Baku and Sumgait, and people died and people got injured. Soviet army got sent over there just to make sure the situation gets taken care of. Armenia goes through Spitak earthquake, like all these things were happening. And it only aggravated the situation because that area was the most ethnically tense situation, and that area was basically the first to declare independence as well. Like they were all sick of it. They were all sick of living with each other, and that's what I'm saying. That Sumgait, Baku need to be addressed by Armenia and get an official statement from the Azerbaijani side because Azerbaijan doesn't admit it happened, and then there needs to be also a full-on investigation for Khojali because Khojali is a city that was heavily Azerbaijani populated in Nagorno-Karabakh area, and all of a sudden civilians died there too. During the war, 1992. So we need to investigate those and come out with a public statement on both sides and see what the facts are, and from a perspective of not just propaganda. Because I don't want to hear where Khojali didn't happen. Because I want to understand what are those photos that I see of dead people in Azerbaijan, like majority Azerbaijan area, and not to mention the mayor of Khojali ends up getting killed. So the only source that we really have, and the journalists that try talking about it get killed. So we need a full-on investigation of those, and that's the starting point. Because other than that, there's no time frame. Other than that, people are just pointing, saying, you did Khojali, you kill kids. And we go like, are you kidding me? Have you seen Sumgait, Baku? Half of San Francisco's Armenian population is just Baku Armenians, like, what the hell? And that just needs to be addressed. Like, I think that needs to be addressed from the very beginning, from a starting point of resolving this issue. Because if you want to know how to fix the issue, you got to know the root of the problem. If the root of the problem is Baku and Sumgait, if we agree on that, then we need, Baku, Sumgait, and Khojali, we need to address those. And Kirovabad as well. There's a lot of cities that had pogroms. That needs to be addressed as first. And then you got to move on to, okay, Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, you need to agree, Azerbaijan, that they need to run themselves because you've broken a bunch of khachkars, basically tombstones, Armenian tombstones, in Nakhchivan and turned it into a military exercising facility. What the fuck, man? So you're telling me these people who self-determine themselves as a country can't operate as themselves? Best believe they're going to get ethnically cleansed because that's what that's what you did with our, monasteries and tombstones in Nakhchivan. Not to mention, every now and then we get a picture of a beheaded soldier. The fuck is that? You're not giving much room for us to work with either. So both sides need to condemn what's the appropriate measures for Khojaly zum Guide Baku.
How realistic is that investigation of actually happening, do you think?
It comes with a change of the regime from Azerbaijani side, because I think that Armenia had its fair share of corruption too. We'd be lying if we said Armenia was a saint of its own up until 2018. Armenians are now very lucky that they have a very I wouldn't say genuine yet, because 5 years from now we'll read whether it was or was not, right? Because right now we were on our honeymoon with the 2018 Velvet Revolution with no bloodshed. But we also need to understand that the Pashinyan administration had room to work with in the international community as well. They could have had better foreign policy. Like, these things we need to hold accountable, and we need to understand those. Like, okay, Pashinyan, you need to compromise with Azerbaijan, but you also need to understand that Azerbaijan's regime is corrupt as shit. You have to work with them. But if that doesn't come, if it doesn't get resolved this year, this war is going to continue. I genuinely think this war is going to continue until it gets resolved, because Azerbaijan has been just sitting on 2006 to 2019 weapons and just waiting for them to blast off. It's brutal, but that's just from the perspective of, okay, if anything can be, resolved in terms of because now Iran is into the picture too. Iran is now very avidly into, hey, maybe we can throw in a suggestion for you guys, and then Russia goes like, okay, maybe I can read what this says, because Russia's ally is Iran, right? Like, technically in the world of selling weapons, Russia doesn't care about any embargo at this point. But yeah,
so convoluted. This
dude,
that's such a hellacious area right now.
Hey, dude, I don't even know what that means, but hellacious it is. Hellacious it is.
It's pretty much, it's like hell. Pretty
hell.
much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, because it's just so hard tracking all of that, man. Like,
yeah.
I was able to follow you there, but like, I don't know, maybe like in 20 minutes, I'll lose track of all that, and I'm gonna have to go back and watch. Dude. There's just so much.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's
ADD in me.
It's not. No, it's not even. It's not the way you break it down. It's just there's so many.
No, I
paths that end up
100%.
getting crossed. And that's what's difficult too for us. Like, Armenians will get frustrated. Like, no one, like, we're not here, and to an extent we're not. So then you try and give like a high level to whatever, like a regular American or Hispanic, whatever. Take your pick, and then like it's like, okay, well, tell me more. And it's like, well, shit, how much time do you have, man? It's like, I don't even know if I can tell you. It's like, can I explain all this to you right now? Like, what you just broke down. It's like, holy crap, man.
The same way Syrians will tell you, how did we lose our government like that? Like, how did we just become a war zone like that? Right? Like, I feel like if you ask a Syrian, they'd be like, do you have enough time? Do you have vodka? Like, do you have all these resources that we can get into? And Armenia's is like a 25-year-old conflict. And the conflict in itself is dating back 100 years now. The root of the problem happened in 1920s, right? Like, if we consider the root of the issue, but the root of the conflict in itself, where violence started taking place, was late 80s. But the conflict, I mean, the whole root of the issue is 1920s. It's 100 years. The Aribatsatri, Soviet Union, and then the pogroms, and then how Stalin was different than Gorbachev, like all these things. Like,
most people are gonna be like, well, who, where, when, what?
Yeah.
What was Garb what?
So, and sometimes people say, oh, it's just commie stuff. Yeah. It's like, we're not commies. We're socialists. That never happened. That was the aspiration.
Yeah. I don't know, man. It's, because I asked that because I don't know. Like, I'm looking at all this. You see, like, it seems like there's a couple days of not as much news. You're like, is something good happening? Or I'm like, is it a good thing we're not hearing anything? Is it a bad thing we're not hearing anything? And then you hear a hospital bombed, targeting maternity ward. Another this happens. Like,
from my, just to make people feel at ease, the awful silver lining to, civilian casualty is that they're digging low. They're only providing more and more documents to be researched in the future about how corrupt Azerbaijan is, because they technically had a clean record since 1994. Clean record saying the rest of the world didn't really care. Now, all of their PR firms are exposed. All of their, of course, there's been research on it before, but our generation now knows fully that Azeri lobbying is a thing. Azerbaijan as an oil, guzzling country exists. But there's also a silver lining to these things that, when they're going that low, right? It's kind of predictable. That means we're doing something right in other areas where like we gain land. Like for example, today I saw reports. I don't know if it's confirmed or not confirmed right now, but an area called Gubadli was taken back by Armenians, and that could be traced as to why the maternity hospital got bombed, because they're going low. They're going strategically low. They just want your focus to shift over there from over there, from a military tactic, right?
Jeez.
But also, like, I think one thing to note that's very important is that right after this whole situation, it's okay, camera didn't see, the whole situation, like with Israel, right? Israel just got a cool little friendship with the UAE.
Yeah.
And the UAE is notorious for not liking Turkey. Yeah. They're actually one of the guys that was trying to veto the UN president becoming a president, right? One of them was Greece, one of them was Cyprus, one of them was Armenia, the other one was the UAE. This is very interesting. So now you're seeing ties with Armenia and UAE, and the UAE being, I said that name so many times, United Arab Emirates, basically Dubai people. They are trying to lead an anti-Turkish movement. Essentially, they're trying to get all these countries that don't vibe with them and get them on their side. Because Israel's not happy with what Turkey's doing in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's not happy at all. So Israel is now tying the knot with UAE and Bahrain, a friendship knot, because the Muslim countries don't get along with Israel really, right? With some countries that Iran that don't even admit that Israel exists. And they're carving out deals. And now that can be a great alleyway for Israel to change its oil industry to the United Arab Emirates, being kind of a sidestep of diplomacy that Armenia doesn't really have much to offer, but Dubai does. So when you see that relationship get, struck in the middle of a conflict like Armenia and Turkey and Azerbaijan, that is definitely like Armenia's diplomacy talking there. Because if you can get Israel to stop using Azeri oil, the conflict is completely changed. The geopolitical factors completely change.
But how'd that little, I don't know what's the right word, relationship then develop with Israel and UAE? Because Israel typically doesn't have a good relationship with Muslim countries. Is that accurate?
No, it's accurate. It's accurate.
So now
it's a rough neighborhood.
UAE, so now you have with UAE, how'd that even come to be?
Well, the UAE is definitely trying to it's shifting its foreign policy. Right. It was more on soft power meaning like to come through. We're like the Vegas of the Middle East and investments and whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But now it's actually like, okay, we need to make sure Turkey doesn't become as big of doesn't create a hegemony, right? Like it doesn't become the big dog of the Middle East, because that's what Turkey's doing. That's why you have Saudi Arabia boycotting Turkish products. Because Saudi Arabia is questioning Turkey. They're like, okay, let's see how well you do. And then Saudi Arabia basically caused their economy to go even more into shit.
And they banned quite a lot of tourists from going there.
Yeah. Russia banned a lot of Turkish goods as well. UAE, I'm not sure. I think they did as well. But also this is a proxy, and essentially because Saudi Arabia and the UAE do not fuck with Qatar anymore. Qatar being heavily tied with Turkey as well. That's why Al Jazeera, being a Qatari government newspaper source, they're playing in favor of a lot of Azeri Turkish conversations. So that's that power balance. If Israel becomes closer with the UAE, which is now becoming a little, maybe in the future, not right now, closer with Saudi Arabia, that would fall in Armenia's benefit as well. They just need to make sure to be cool and balance the relationship with Iran, if they have a relationship with Israel as well, because Iran's not going to be happy if another country like Armenia tries to cozy up with Israel when it literally just provided alleyway for them to bring shit, because Georgia and Azerbaijan and Turkey have them closed, and your only ally really is Iran. From the Middle East world.
Yeah. I'm curious to see then how I wasn't even thinking really anything about that I saw the Israel and UAE, whatever that was happen. And I think there was another one wasn't there another place, Israel and someone else?
It was Bahrain. Bahrain was a part of that. Yeah. I mean, Egypt was the very first one to tie any kind of relationship with Israel. And I think that was the smartest move they could have done at the time. But like United Arab Emirates, they're definitely trying to create bigger alliances in the region, given we can't just be an investment location. Like at some point Vegas gets old, right? Vegas needs people to live there. Vegas needs like a say in what happens. It can't just be for fun and games. Like you actually have to have a sphere of influence as well if you want to be a big dog.
Well, I guess we'll have to see that. I'm curious to see what comes of that. All right, man. Any like parting notes then you would have for people? What Armenian, non-Armenian, and in terms of digesting news, spreading information. I'm always just trying to be cognizant of the fact of like, okay, if I'm sharing something, I'm like, let me just make sure it's not factually incorrect. Because I'll see a bunch of stuff posted, and some of it's like, holy crap, is that real? Because some of like the media outlets, I think they've proven they're reputable, some of them, but then some of them, like, I don't know where this is from.
Yeah.
So just anything that you think will be
read
helpful.
your sources.
Yeah.
Read the same way you look up where your food is from. I hope you do. If you right, you gotta look up where your news source is from. That's what I always like to say, right? Like what you consume is what your thoughts shape to be as well. So be conscious of what news source you're receiving it from. Understand who the writer is sometimes. And it's a lot of research for a very limited time that we have in this life, right? We work 8 hours a day in the US. So you don't have time to research unless you're interested in it. But just understand that the source you're getting it from is not necessarily 100%. And a lot of the sources that we're getting is secondary or third, meaning it's not actually taken from the front lines. A lot of the information we take from the front lines are actually from what governments tell us, and governments aren't going to tell us the truth. If they're losing, they're not going to tell you they're losing.
Yeah.
So I think another thing is something that's more on a personal level for people to make sure to tune out sometimes. We're always on our phones, man. And the amount of information that we've been getting is unnecessarily a lot. I mean, of course, it's necessary to know, but it's just bombarding our brains with too much, and it kills our emotion and it kills our happiness too. And it changes us, and I don't want it to change people. I mean, I've gone 8 gray hairs in the past 2 months, and that is the most. And I don't like that, even though I can be a silver fox, rawr, if that's even the sound that silver foxes make. But we just got to take care of ourselves is what I'm trying to say. Whether it be feel okay with a smile, feel okay with a happy face, because a lot of people are feeling weird about being happy. I want them to understand that, the troops out there are literally on the ground, working hard ass, they're working their asses off. And to not take that for granted and to do your part, donate as much as you can to Armenia Fund. My bank account looks like a college student again, and I'm very okay with saying that. Make sure the Armenia Fund money that you put in is what you feel like that's your compensation to being an Armenian. Because this isn't nationalism, it's patriotism. The difference between nationalism and patriotism is nationalism has a common identity of what we are not, based off of a national team, right? Armenia, we are not Azerbaijan, and therefore we are Armenia. No, it's not like that. We will do whatever we will do whatever it takes to defend our existence, and that's patriotism. So be a patriot, don't be a nationalist. Keep checking out your sources, and thank you so much for having me, man. This was like a vent session alone for me. I feel like I had a lot of information to tell people. Yeah, man, I'm glad we were able to make this work, because usually I'll have something and I'll go with it, but with someone, when it's a topic like this where I personally I'm not as well versed on it, maybe like at the average level at most, then I have the opportunity to talk with someone that does their due diligence, like to say the least, and is actually educated on it. I was like, that's why I asked him. I'm like, dude, what do you want to talk about? He told me. I'm like, perfect. Let's just run with that, man. You're gonna know what to hit. So yeah, I appreciate it, man. Very informative. I know there's a lot of people who will be able to take it with this. Fortunately, I've been able to say that for the last few guests, which has been good, because I've been kind of focusing on this topic pretty much since the last month. But thank you again, man. Thanks for coming on. Looking forward to seeing what happens with that show you were discussing. Once that comes to fruition, I'm sure that's going to be just as great. And we'll see how it goes from there. Thank you, and thank you, Nova Labs. Yep, you got it.